Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Film Music House. This is our summer edition. For those of you that maybe attended the Sundance Film Music House, welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome on in. We are a community of composers and creatives that love film music. So Film Music House is the place for you if you're one of these people. I want to say a big thank you to Perspective Forum for providing us this platform. Big thank you to Adonis for helping us spearhead this on the platform. And I want to give just a quick little bit of housekeeping. We have two live panels that are tomorrow. We are chatting with the agent Richard Kraft at 9:30 a.m. And then we have our music for animation panel at 11 a.m. So hopefully we will see you both, or you will see you all tomorrow. But I know we are here to talk about the processes of hiring a composer with some pretty incredible panelists. So please help me welcome Steve Yockey, Colleen Fitzpatrick, and Thomas Golubic. Hello, everybody. Now, some of you need no introduction, but I will just give a brief one-liner. Steve Yockey, showrunner, creator, writer of The Flight Attendant. Colleen Fitzpatrick, music creative production at Netflix and previously at Nickelodeon. And Thomas Golubic, music supervisor of Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, and the recent limited series, Your Honor. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Such a pleasure. And, people have been really looking forward to this panel because it's a community of composers. They obviously are either trying to break into the industry, they're mid-career. They want to know kind of what's the politics of kind of being hired as a composer in your different fields. So the topic of the panel being hiring a composer. I just want to ask each of you how you work with composers. I know it's all differently. So what's a scenario where you have influence over the hiring of a composer? And let's start with Thomas Golubic.
Sure. Well, as a music supervisor, our job is really to help to navigate the music vision of a project. And in some situations, you are navigating the composer hire. Sometimes there's someone already on board when you're hired, or there's pre-existing relationships that you are kind of helping to navigate. It depends on the project. I think our job is to always be able to figure out how to make the entire vision of the project both something that everybody can discuss together and also something that we can all steer towards together. So on most of the projects I've worked on the last few years, which are primarily TV projects, I've been involved with either the composer hire or with the score and the score notes process and kind of helping to navigate the delivery of the music. I tend to be a little bit more holistic and kind of involved with everything a bit. But again, our job is really to pivot on what the project needs. And if you have a strong relationship between a composer and a showrunner or a writer-director, it's really our job to not get in the way of that and just make sure that things are moving smoothly.
Colleen, how about yourself?
I would say that 90% of the time it is the showrunner's decision, obviously. The 10% that we make the decision are usually based on very specific circumstance. Either the showrunner and the team has really never worked with a composer before, they've asked for our help, or there's something that's so incredibly specific about the show. It's either a musical or it's music driven, or there's a very high touch in terms of like music, in terms of music needs. And that requires us to, as a studio or as an exec, work very closely with the supervisor and the showrunner to help make their vision come to life. So at the end of the day, it's always the showrunner's, decision, but we in that 10% period are sometimes greater facilitators, and we can say, hey, this guy or that gal can really do it.
Just to follow up before we get to Steve, because I'm curious if you have influence over a list, like say there is a point where the showrunner needs some ideas. Are you in a position where you can provide a list of like, these are who you suggest would be perfect for the role?
Yes, absolutely. Very often, the first thing I do is, I break down the script. I meet with I have my own ideas about it, and then I meet with the showrunner and I think about what they are looking for, how to make their vision a reality. And, it's interesting. Sometimes they'll say, I really want this person. And very often that person is the right person, but sometimes that person is not the right person for what they're saying. And, I can give examples where we've had the luxury of doing, spec submissions. That doesn't happen very often, but it does happen when things are very specific. And I'm often amazed that I like to do my submissions blindly, which is a little sneaky, but I'm always amazed when the person that everyone thinks is going to get the gig doesn't get the gig or surprises them. But yes, in answer to your question, yes, we do put together lists. Very often, though, agents go around us. Agents have existing relationships. But what I use our list for is generally to, serve what the showrunner is looking for, but also introduce emerging composers. We like to put people that have not been heard and people that have not been given an opportunity on our list. And then we do a little short list and say, these are some people that we think are great, but we've had submissions from a wide number of people that you should also be aware of. And then sometimes there are really standouts and we flag those standouts.
And I would say further to Colleen's point, my job is, I always view it as essentially being like a casting director. I think that, casting a composer is one of the most important casting decisions you make in a project, because their influence is going to really impact everything in a lot of ways. And everyone knows, and I'm sure Steve can speak to this, there are times when you cast somebody and you're not getting exactly what you were hoping for, or you're getting something different and you need to pivot somehow and find a way to make the most of that, that opportunity, or try to turn what could be a problem into an opportunity. I always try to view the composer hire as an educational opportunity for everybody involved, because a lot of times we're dealing with multiple different pre-existing relationships. There's a lot of jockeying among producers. Studios have their own, agendas, and everybody kind of has their own sense of where it is. So we try as supervisors to be very impartial, but also to be really dig deep and present the information in a way where the right answer becomes obvious. And that's usually going through those composer reels, finding specific examples that, can be put into practical application into a project. So you're not like, oh, I love the emotional work of that composer. Well, if you're doing a project that doesn't need all those high points of emotion, a lot of times that will sway people in the wrong way. And you might say, you know what, we're going to have a few mixes that are going to be very specific to practical transitions or interesting instrumentation that carries you forward in this way or that. So for us, we present that information, and then also, where are they located? Are they somebody who likes to collaborate with the showrunners and have them in the studio, or is it somebody who likes to work separately? Are they able to create, source pieces, or are they really just doing the score? There's so many factors that come into it. So we really have to kind of look at all of those elements and then articulate that clearly, present the music in a clear way, and make sure that all the agendas that are there are being covered somehow and everyone feels represented. That way the answer feels like a natural one, and everyone can say, hey, even though my buddy who I was fighting for didn't get the gig, I'm so glad we got this person because I think they're great.
Great. And Steve, why don't we hear from you? When are you in power of influence? From Colleen's answer, it sounds always showrunners are.
But you'd be surprised though when you have a lot of 800-pound gorillas in the room. When we interviewed composers, what was great about it is we're working with Berlanti Productions. So Jen Lentz, who runs Post over there, basically put together like a list for us because we hadn't hired a music supervisor yet, because this was pretty early in the process. And we met with them on her suggestion. I obviously listened to all of their stuff. One of the people on that list was Blake Neely, and he came in and he had been presented to me by everyone as, this is the guy who does a lot of the music for the Berlanti shows, right? But looking into his background of work, he also did, like, for instance, The Keepers on Netflix, which is a theme that stays with me. Even, like, I could sing it now. I won't, I'll spare you all. So I was very excited because it demonstrated to me, just that one outlier demonstrated to me the breadth of what he's capable of. It depends very much on the show. And so we had a really fantastic meeting. I know we're going to talk about how we all work together, so I won't go into that yet, but it was myself, my two co-showrunners, Meredith and Marcy, Kaylee Cuoco is the number one on our call sheet and an EP, and Sarah Schechter from Berlanti were all in that meeting. And so he kind of sat down across from a row of us and we had a really great conversation, and he really vibed with the very specific thing that I was asking for in the show.
Well, on this topic, because this is a great example of the hiring of Blake Neely on the Flight Attendant. So he was shortlisted to you through Berlanti Productions.
Yes.
Was he pitching at all, or did he just go right into meeting with you? Did you get to hear any of his music beforehand, or what was that process?
I mean, I did my homework on everyone, but I did my own homework. We had lists of projects they had worked on, and so it was kind of up to us to feel that out. But I was looking for something very specific from the score of The Flight Attendant. So the meetings were easy because it was sort of like people either got what I was trying to go for or they didn't. And in Blake's case, he like took it and just knocked it out of the park in a way that I could have never imagined. And that's always the best type of collaboration because I'm not a composer. Like I know what I want it to feel like and I know how I want it to work in the show. But I also know that I need to be able to say that to someone and then let them go do the magic part. And I come from a background in theater, so I'm used to collaborating with people and I'm really open to, other people who are good at their jobs being better at their jobs than I am.
Did you have an example of what you were looking for as far as what was the brief? And how did Blake exceed your expectations?
Well, Blake exceeded them off the bat because he walked in and said, okay, so I read the script and I was kind of thinking about using children's toys in the score. And I was like, this is going to go well. My kind of, the thing that I was looking for from a composer that I said to everyone was, I really don't want the show to tell us how to feel about Cassie. I want the show to tell us how Cassie is feeling. And so I'm looking for something that can capture all of the anxiety, all of the kind of tension and release that is in her character throughout the season. And so I was really looking for like a Bernard Herrmann score using only percussion. And he lit up like a light bulb and was like, well, that's a challenge that I can take. I'm excited about that. And then, Kaylee was like, but also do the children's toys thing. And he was like, okay. So he 2 days later sent me a rough of what would be our opening credit song. It was that quick and it was that solid of a match.
Incredible. It's a great opening cue too for those titles.
I think so too. Yeah.
So, Colleen and Thomas, on the topic of existing composer relationships versus building new relationships, where do you fit in that? Like, are you encouraging these existing relationships? Are you seeking new voices? Where do you fall in the spectrum of this? Because of course, there's plenty of directors and showrunners that have an ongoing relationship with composers. So I just was curious about your opinions on that. We can start with Thomas.
Sure. I mean, I think, what's really valuable about a pre-existing relationship means that you have a potential shorthand, right? You have the capacity for people to be able to have a comfort level and an ability to be frank and honest with each other, depending obviously on the relationship. So there's a great value to that. And with multiple producers on projects and networks, you kind of have a lot of different relationships. So you have to kind of prioritize them to a certain degree. And I think, we try to be very cognizant of all the political things that are happening, but we try to also find a way to make them neutral and kind of get to, it's a little bit like, I always feel like I'm like a navigating a divorce, and I got to keep the conversation about the kids and not about everybody's individual agendas. And so it's like, what is the kid? The kid is the story. The kid is the final product. The kid is essentially something really magical that people will really respond to, and making sure that we're all steering towards the benefit of that. For Your Honor, for example, like that was a project where, there was one pre-existing relationship with the director and Volker Bertelmann, who did the score in the end. And, I really liked his work. I didn't know if he was the right person for the project. He had a lot going on at the time. And I'm very cognizant about bandwidth. And I think that composers as supervisors, are increasingly put in situations where they have to take on too many projects just to kind of be profitable. And so you end up in this sort of sink or swim situation where you have a composer who's trying to do too many projects at once. And I was concerned about that. At the same time, we went through a really exciting group of different composers and really talked to them. I do pre-meetings with a lot of them just to get a sense of the project and give them an overview of how I sort of see it and just kind of get their vibe on it. And then we try to set up a presentation and say, who do you want to do meetings with? And in the end, Volker was the right one. He was sort of the pre-existing relationship, but he also did, I think, some of his best work on Your Honor. And it was a really beautiful and really unique score. So it's one of those situations where, there were people that I was more excited about early on, but as soon as I started working with him, I realized he's got this. He's doing this really well. He's value adding at all levels on a project that had a lot of producers and a lot of different opinions and a lot of jockeying going on. So I think that in a way, it was kind of a perfect solution. And I think considering the fact that we also, like the Flight Attendant, dealt with a COVID problem, that we got shut down for production, had to pick it back up again, having that cohesive score really helped to bring everything together, because the show itself had to transform and change because of COVID, and the score really kept the stakes high and kept the story compelling all the way through. And that was really Folker's influence and his hard work.
Colleen?
We make it's very important at Netflix for us to share new and emerging voices. That is a priority. It is also a personal priority of mine. I know that people have great existing relationships, and as Thomas illustrated, I think sometimes that can be super beneficial for the show. But I also think that there is so much work right now. Very often showrunners and teams have multiple projects going at once. And you talk about the bandwidth issue. It never hurts to introduce people to new voices. So one of the things that, I said this before, and I really do it, even when someone says to me, I want to go with Thomas, I will say, that's great. I'm going to send you just a couple other names. Just, these people have popped up on our radar, and I'd love for you to just, take a listen, tell me your thoughts. And it's not done in a way that, and I hope, and Steve can hopefully, attest, it's not meant in a big bad studio way. Like, we don't want you to go with that person. It's more like, here are some amazing people that we'd like you to be aware of, and give an opportunity to both those people and potentially to your company and your artistic endeavors, to have an opportunity to work with some new, fresh faces, different approach. I think it's really important, and I do it all the time. I do it on every single show that I work on.
Can I just say,
yeah.
just based on what Colleen was saying, and I'm sorry if you can hear my dog in the background, I apologize. On what she was saying, I love getting lists like that, because I love hearing new things and getting excited about new things. And the thing is, the showrunner has to be excited about whoever's doing the score, because you are inevitably going to have to defend that decision to the studio and the network. And you're gonna want to be able to say, Colleen gave me this list, we narrowed it down to this man or woman, they're amazing. And here's why I think they're the best fit, and here's what I know about them from these contacts and that kind of stuff. And so it always helps when someone with more knowledge than you have about all of these different people gives you some context. So you're not just going, I want this one person and it's all I want, because there may be a better person out there.
I think also tied to that, it's particularly important with composer hires, because for the longest time, it has been a white male, very dominated field. And in the last few years, it's been really exciting to see so many new voices, both in, there's more diversity, there's more life experience. And I think that work is really adding a new dynamic energy to a lot of projects. So I think we're in a very lucky time period. And I think, to Colleen's point, going that extra mile of saying, hey, do we have some more diversity we can throw in here? Do we have somebody who's really hungry and looking for an opportunity, could really learn from this, as well as being able to really deliver on it? That makes a huge difference. You can feel that energy in a project when someone is straining to try to find the way to make the best solution possible. And when you have a composer that's a go-to composer, that's a professional, that is not always what comes out of that work. You can get great work out of them, but you're not always getting the work that has that extra dynamic of oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting this opportunity, and I'm really learning, and I'm really building, and I'm part of something new. And to be part of that, to help to curate that, is huge.
What's a common mistake that you find that composers do when applying for a job or pitching for a job? Do you find that you are weeding out submissions maybe that didn't follow the brief, that sent you files that don't work, or what, Colleen, go ahead. Why don't you start?
I'll take this one because this is an enormous pet peeve of mine. Mm-hmm. People must pay attention to the brief. They must pay attention to the context of the show. What is the show? It's a comedy, so don't send me, something that you want me to hear, as opposed to what the show needs, right? That's the biggest problem I feel in reels is often that people want to demonstrate what they can do as opposed to serving what is needed. So it's kind of like, if the analogy might be if you go to a restaurant and somebody orders a burger, but you serve them a filet mignon because you can make it. But they're like, but wait, I wanted a burger and I wanted the best possible burger, and that's kind of, so really paying attention to what your showrunner and what the team is looking for. And also, being selective, being really judicious with your cues and your choices. Less is sometimes more. People don't want to sit through 50 cues that may not mean that much to them. And so I would often, I think, we were on another panel and, one of the composers said something, and I'm going to repeat, go through and edit yourself, but also give your reel to an outside friend or something. And, because a lot of times people are so close to it and they really want, like Steve or Thomas, to hear this cue that is completely irrelevant to what the project is looking for. So that's a huge pet peeve of mine.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, also with agents in the middle, and this is advice I would really give to agents, like, please do not send WAV files. Like, the number of times because what happens is, and just it's a practical thing, you send me a reel with all WAV files, I send those off for people to listen to. They have no idea what composer it is. They don't know where it is. They're now going and Googling. We're talking about busy producers trying to figure out the name of a cue inside something like chase scene. And it's like, how many times are you going to find a track with that? So please don't send WAV files. Like, I know composers all want to only do with WAV files. Translate them to MP3s, put all the information in there. If I see your name as an agent showing up on the grouping or in the notes section, and I love that music, I'm going to keep on thinking, I'm going to go back to that composer. So in a weird way, the delivery of the reel is really important, not just on the quality of it and the judiciousness of the choices, but also on the practical delivery, because I got to send it out to people. And if I'm spending my evening retranslating files and loading in all the information, I'm not listening. And then I'm not really invested in you as the solution to my problem. So it becomes a practical delivery. Be smart about it. As Colleen said, know what the project is looking for and choose only those pieces. And if they're really great and exciting, it's very easy for me to present that and say, hey, I think this person has a really interesting voice and it's a neat angle, and it might not be the angle you want. And I might go to Steve and say, hey, this is a crazy idea, but it's a bunch of children's toys, and I don't know if it's going to resonate with you, but it resonated with me, and I just want to throw it by you. If it's a terrible idea, you can yell at me for being dumb. But it's like, those are the choices that we want to do, and if somebody makes that choice, that can be great. It can also backfire on you. You might say, I'm going to put all my eggs in this one basket, and now suddenly you're like, it's not the basket that we wanted, though.
I'll actually, I mean, I have less of direct text for this question, but I will say something that from our end, from my end as a showrunner, is I was asked by Berlanti, by Jen in post, to like give her, what is it that you're looking for out of a score, right? The brief, essentially. And I spent a lot of time on that. And I don't want to waste anybody's time, and I don't want you to waste my time. So I can't support what Colleen said enough about, like, share with me the things that are close to what I'm asking for, if you have that in your wheelhouse, as opposed to sharing with me the score to, a Danny Elfman score to a Batman movie. Because that's not what we're looking for,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to just add one thing really quickly. Like, when we have the luxury of having a showrunner or a team put together something like Steve was talking about, like a brief or a sonic mood board. I had a showrunner who was so into it. She put together, clips from movies and her favorite soundtracks and her favorite bands. And she put them all on this amazing mood board, and you could press on them and, listen to them. And it was for an animated project. And what was remarkable was I was able to send that out to people, right? And it was so clear what we were looking for. And I would get things back that I I almost wanted to say, did you not receive my email? I mean, that's how far off some of the pitches can be. So that's just.
Yeah, it can be deeply frustrating. And I would say one of the things that also is a mistake is sometimes they'll take a very high profile project and put that score in there because they want you to know, oh, they worked on a high profile project, but it's not really relevant to this. So now it's like, do I want to add this in there because I'm now stuck in the name chasing game too now. I'm like, well, I don't want to. So we use a system in Airtable where we present all the composers. We have all their information. We have links to their music. You can go to Spotify. For those who are motivated, they can really dive deep and really dig into that world. And again, not every showrunner is able to do that. So we just try to make sure, and it's also very neutral. So the idea being that you can kind of listen to them all by thematic mixes and listen to, all right, what does the intrigue sound like? And you listen to a whole bunch and you realize, oh, that one keeps on sticking with me for some reason. I don't know why. You can play it blind and then really come to your own conclusions because we listen to so much score and it can sound very samey. And the trick for us is how do you differentiate it? How do you find a way to really show that each composer has a specific personality and a specific approach that might be right here?
So on the topic of reels, we just have some just basic questions. We've heard no wave files. What about sending like streaming links, or do you want the actual files when being submitted to, or do you, for sharing purposes, prefer a private media player? Or if you could go into just the reels of that all, and we can start with Colleen or
sorry.
Thomas, whatever.
You can go.
Yeah, I'm very specific about it. We want to get download links, so never attach an MP3 to an email. If you send me a huge one, it's going to clog up my email, and important emails won't come through. So never attach a file to the email. A download link is a lovely thing. For us, it's practical, and if it's all MP3s, high quality MP3s with all the information filled out, super helpful. That way, I can load it in here, and if I got to upload it to a showrunner, out it goes. If you give me a streaming link, I'm not going to be able to like put individual links to every one of your cues and then arrange that for somebody. I'd much rather get a download link for me personally. I think the idea is that if you want to do both, and Disco and other programs like that can do that, that's great. You can stream it, check it out really quickly, download the ones you want. I think those all work. The idea being that if there's clarity in it and there's a judiciousness in what's being presented, for us, we just want to be able to move it if we have to move it, or send it if we have to send it. I think that's kind of the key part, because things move really fast. And for us, if we have to spend too much time reorganizing someone else's material, it just becomes a bummer, and then we don't do our job as effectively as we could.
I agree.
And Steve, on your end, when you are reviewing a composer, do you like to have a download of it, or do you like to have a streaming link? I guess you're probably getting it from the studio or from a music supervisor, so they're crafting it for you. But I'm just curious about your personal preference.
I like getting it in an email, but I am the person that Thomas was talking about who then goes onto the internet and onto every streaming service I can find and like does the deep dive, because I find that like once you get past that top layer of stuff, which can sound a little samey all the time, because if everyone's sending you things that kind of match the brief, you kind of get a deeper sense of what the composers are capable of. And in some cases, maybe what they enjoy doing more than the stuff that they sense for that particular project. And so when I find that myself, as opposed to it being sent to me and being way off the brief, then it's like a little eye-opening kind of experience. And oh, this is exciting. And yeah, I would really like to meet this person. And then it's about the vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say one other thing. When you were talking about divorce and the kid, I actually think of it as more the beginning of a relationship. I think of myself as a matchmaker. I think of myself as like matchmaking. And I've always said this because, you know, at the end of the day, there are a lot of fabulous, very talented people that can do a gig, right? Often it comes down to how two people can work together and how they can communicate and how they can vibe off of one another. And so I think of myself as a matchmaker too.
So you can go to Colleen to the first part and come to me when it's all turned to shit.
Exactly.
Colleen, do you have any feedback on the reel, on just the logistics of receiving music? Do you just agree with what Thomas said, or?
I agree with it. I mean, I'm a little bit more flexible. If people have like existing pages and I can go to it, I will forward those pages, you know, like a a web link or something, but I don't ever send me an MP3. Like, I hate that too. It doesn't
Oh,
make
like the attached file. Yeah. So it's either a link to something like Disco or a website where you can download the MP3 files, or just
some
a stream.
agents, yeah, some
Yeah.
agents have their own programs where everything's sort of neatly put together, but it's important for things to be downloadable for the reasons that Thomas said. We can pick and choose. Again, people don't listen, so you'll get like, if I'm getting 10 reels, let's say, and I ask for 10 reels, invariably agents will send me 30. And if each reel has 10 to 20 cues, nobody's going to listen to all that, right? So we have to sort of sort through and figure out what's most representative so that, Steve can get the best of the bunch and also not be besieged with cue after cue after cue.
And would you recommend that people do like 10 tracks on a reel, or what's an ideal reel length to you? Because of course, like you said, sometimes they're very long. You don't have time to go through it. So what's an ideal length for you?
I think it depends on the project, quite honestly, but I think 5 is fine for me.
Thomas?
I'm a little bit more generous. I mean, if I get 15 or so, I will go through all 15. I will probably not present to someone like Steve more than, let's say, 10 to 14 at the very most. Like, I'm on a search right now, and it's a lot of different producers, and they all have different points of view on it. So I realize it might be a little bit better for me to have a longer list, but I'm also sequencing it. So I'm picking and choosing the order of them and really thinking about how do I get to know that composer. So to me, there's a lot of nuance that goes to a longer one, because the idea being, by the time you get to track 14, I want you to have already got a full sense of that composer and what their abilities are. And I'll have my own sort of honest feedback about what I think that they're strong at. And I try to keep it always very neutral. Because again, nobody wants to have somebody putting their thumb on the scale. Everybody wants to have a sense that they're making the choices themselves. And a lot of our work really is curation of allowing a lot of really strong, interesting ideas being presented in an even platform. So someone like Steve is able to say, I can feel the right answer, and we can kind of all follow that as well.
I can tell you, in this imaginary project that we're doing together, I greatly appreciate that.
Yay.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I did have something to say. I have a preferred process that doesn't always work, but my preferred process is to get the idea of what everyone's looking for, go out and start coming up with names. And then I send out information about the composers. And sometimes there's a reel, sometimes there's music with it. Very often it's their resume or information about them. And then I like the showrunner in my ideal project, Steve, to to like listen and take a listen, but choose a handful that they're very interested in. And then in an ideal world, when we have lots of time or it's music driven, I put them together, and then the composers go back and create a reel and send you the reel after the meeting, after
That
the
makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And that has been my favorite way of working. It is incredibly time consuming. And I would say the vast majority of the time we don't end up doing that because of so many moving parts. And there's like people can't meet or, and production necessitates that we move her quickly or what have you. But that is the ideal way, because then the showrunner really has a conversation, and they not only see how, what the music was like before, based on what they like, they vibe with the person, but how did that person take the notes that they've given them? How did they, interpret the conversation? And that's vital.
Yeah, she's absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that's great, because it really encourages, like you and I both said, the vibe, right? Because I didn't know when we hired Blake, I could have known this just by spending a little more time with him, but that I was going to sit on the couch in his studio while we tried to figure out, this is the episode that happens at a memorial service. How do we choose percussion that feels more
mourny,
like funeralia in a way? And he was like, oh, well, we could do like tubular bells and vibraphones. And I was like, yes, let's do that. And then he just did it there. And it was the most amazing kind of thing. But the process that you're describing to hire a composer, I think would give you kind of a jump on how is that person receiving the information that's coming from the showrunner? Like you can see it reflected back in then their clips. So I think that's a great idea, that process.
Time is a huge factor to this, because I think, Colleen's system is in fact the perfect system, because it is a way of almost test driving out the relationship with people that you're still trying to figure out whether they're the right people to work with. The problem we end up frequently having is they're talking about it too late. It's like by the time the conversation comes to the composers, it's already a scramble. And I think that's where a lot of great opportunities get missed. We try really hard to also open up to other composers who we've not worked with before. I love new discoveries. I don't feel the need to your previous question, Chandler, of going back to the same people, unless I feel like they're the right person for the job, because I kind of know that person. I know how they work. I know if that composer is somebody that is going to love hanging out with Steve and playing around with different ideas, or are they someone they're like, oh God, I was really nervous the entire time they were there and I couldn't get the work done. And it was just sort of like an awkward situation. And that's happened too, where composers are not always the most social beings. And sometimes it's very hard for them to be able to like work with the pressure of having the showrunner with them. And you kind of have to be sensitive to that. Or no, this is a composer that doesn't really know much about music and they love hearing other opinions. And we got to figure out how we can navigate all those opinions towards one directive that's going to help that composer know what to do, so they're not redoing things in 8 different directions with notes from different folks. And that happens too. So we try our best to find a way to streamline that process and get that hire to be a great hire. And then it's like, okay, now we're just adding magic upon magic upon magic. And when that works, oh, it's the greatest feeling.
Great. Well, I think this is an awesome discussion because we're learning a lot about composer hires on your scale of the projects you're doing. But I want to pull way back, and let's say we're brand new composers. We want to get on the influence of your list. We want to be on your radar. We have all sorts of questions coming in from the chat that are just saying like, how do I meet these people? How do I get on their lists? How they may not have the credits. How do they get on this kind of list that Colleen's putting together? So let's just like pull way back. What advice would you give to people that are really looking to get on your radar or be a part of these kind of diverse lists that you're putting together?
I mean, I have a couple thoughts. I mean, one of the important ones really is work at the same level that you are. The number of times I've had people say, hey, I want to be part of this massive project that you're doing, and it's like, well, what are your experience? And they're just like, well, I haven't really done that much yet. I'm just starting out. And you're like, you have to realize that there's a lot of money at stake here. There's a lot of people who have eyeballs on this thing. For me to go in there and say, I met this, lady and she's great, or I met this guy and he seems really talented and I like some of his work, but he's never scored before. It's very hard to say, okay, this is a car I'm going to drive across into the hottest of the desert and hope that it's going to make it back okay. You really want to be able to say they're ready for this. So I think that in many ways, starting on smaller projects is a great way of starting. Like back before COVID, I used to love going to film festivals. And one of the things I would do is watch for new filmmakers, just be like, all right, this is a short, but what are the choices that they made, both as a director, but also in their team? Is this someone I want to work with down the road? So if I send an email to them and saying, hey, I know you just did a short and I know you're adapting this into a feature. I don't know if I'm able to help out, but it'd be great to know more. I think for composers to do that as well is a really smart way of getting themselves into the conversation, because careers happen because people are in the right place, the right time, and they delivered in a big way. A lot of that is really what's in front of you. If you're in Ohio, go to your local film school, go to those screenings and meet those filmmakers, because they're probably going to be very excited about working with you. I think, Ryan and Ludwig, for example, who've like worked together for years. I think that it's like they were at school together. So the idea being that they started their relationship early on together, and then they ended up doing Black Panther together. So there's a long run in being able to build those kind of careers. A lot of it is just being in the right place at the right time and then delivering. So I think relationships are lovely, but even if I love someone's work as an artist, I have to know that they're capable of handling the pace, the speed, the responsibility, the budget, all the requirements that come into working on, especially a fast-paced TV show, but also for films. So I think it's important to always know, where are you in that process and how are you meeting the right people to do your best work so people really notice you?
Colleen, what about these lists? We've had a couple questions about, how you curate these lists and how where you draw your influence on that?
Well, I can't support what Thomas said enough. I think like in the area that I work in particular is I work on like great big shows. And so working at the level that you're at, or at a level like I'm much more apt, but by the way, I've done every level of show, but working at a show that is more apt to take a new shot at a new composer is very different than working at a VFX heavy, big, multi-million dollar show that has all kinds of super, fancy things happening on it, right? So I look at the lists very differently for those types of shows. I'm much more apt to find new people, even though I'm still submitting all the emerging names on the big show. I know in my heart of hearts that the person who's never done anything is not going to get that gig. Like I just know it. It's very, for a whole bunch of reasons. But I do think, so in answer to your question, I look everywhere. I talk to agents, film festivals. I think we scour the internet, people, word of mouth, composers or people that had been in bands that are now moving over to the composition side. I would say word of mouth is probably one of the bigger ways I find people. But I'm not going to lie, I've had some cold submissions that have been great. And so, yeah, I mean, it can be overwhelming, the cold calls. That's the problem. And that's the one thing I will say. I mean, it is my job to know you, but it's impossible to know every one of you and to stay on top of it. So I always tell people to reach out, let me know what's happening. Hey, I just scored this indie movie and it won this award. Let me know. You may not hear back from me, but you'll know that I've read it. And I have a really good sense of like where I put projects and the appropriate composers. So you may score like a comedy that's irreverent and really cool, and I have nothing right now, but a year from now I have something and I'll remember. And that is vital to the communication. And I would second that to what Thomas said. I would do it with showrunners and directors and really build a network of people that can support you and that you can go to for advice and share music with and have a dialogue.
I'll add one other thing, which is that editors and music editors can be tremendously valuable in this process as well, because a lot of times they will tempt things with music that is not necessarily from the go-to standard fare projects. Colleen and I just are working on a project right now, and a lot of what would end up being temped in there was a composer from Denmark who I met on a trip, to Europe at some point. And I loved his work. I found him really fascinating. He's not the right hire for this particular project, but he really helped us in giving us great score that we were able to utilize as temp to help establish a palette, and I think that can be a really valuable part too. Like I usually work on most of the projects we work on, we really help to deliver that first wave of ideas of what that temp score might be if we haven't had a hire already. Ideally, you want to bring in the temp score from the composer themselves, but a lot of times they're already editing before you've hired that person. So in a way, it helps to kind of establish the conversation. And that's where more obscure scores under lesser known artists really can come into play, because there's something compelling about what they did and it's unique. And that has an application in that particular situation. So I think meeting editors and music editors is a really valuable part, because they're fans too. And a lot of them are either previous musicians or previous composers or people who just love music. And so, people like Colleen and I are great, but we're kind of the lowest hanging fruit as far as where to reach out to. If you're being a little bit more resourceful, I think that can be helpful. And
I was going to say one last thing, if you really want to get into the groove of stuff, work for established composers, work with them, work for them. Blake is a good example of people that, he's worked with many people over the years, and those people who have been his seconds over the years are now going on and doing great things. And there's a level of trust, but more than the level of trust and talent, there is the business side of it. which is I have an understanding that you know about timelines, that you understand how the politics of the process works, when things come in, how to address notes, how to, so it's vital to not just have the talent, but have an understanding of the business. And I think that composers and editors really help you do that.
Also, people help each other up. Just to that, what Colleen just brought up, when Blake was doing his interview with us, someone else had walked out, and we do our best to, so you're not walking right past the other person who's doing the interview, because that's
thank you,
anxiety inducing. However, he did see the man, and then he was like, oh, he worked for me for a long time. And then at the end of the interview, he was like, well, I think this went well, but like, if you don't hire me, definitely hire him, because he's great. And Blake, like, very generously kind of like did a in-person rec for this person who had been composing for him. And I think that goes a long way. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff goes a long way. And if I could just add one thing to, I think there's something about being open to small opportunities when they arise. Our music supervisor, Frankie Pine, found this, was able to, with the help of some budget, get this song that we wanted for a particular episode. But the artist who watched the episode and agreed to let us use the song in a very unusual capacity, said we couldn't use it again over the credits. And I was like, oh, but I just want to use it so bad. I just want like, if we can't have it, is there some kind of like broken doll version of it? And Frankie was like, well, give me a second. And then 2 days later, she had gone out to a couple different composers, a couple different singers, a couple different producers, and they had all comped something like, is this what you're talking about? And the one composer and singer working together who came up with this, I mean, for lack of a better, it's a broken doll version of the song, and it plays at the end of the episode, and it worked out great. But I now know that's a composer I could go to for a smaller project that I saw how quickly they worked. I saw how they responded to the specific cue that I gave. That's somebody who thinks like me. So I think finding those little opportunities, maybe that's through music supervisors or people like Thomas and Colleen, and like, and really kind of like grabbing onto those, as opposed to being like, I would like to score this entire television series. I just think, it's about scale sometimes.
It's a great point. Dave Porter got introduced to Breaking Bad and to Better Call Saul and El Camino, largely because I was stuck. I was trying to figure out how to establish score in the pilot to Breaking Bad. And, I had already convinced them to get rid of all the temp music, because I just said, I love everything about this. I hate all of your temp music, which they had spent weeks putting together. And they are very sweet and brave people. And they said, all right, big shot, why don't you go temp it? So I tried to temp it as well as I could, and I had a real problem in the opening of it, of how to get the crash of the RV, which really sets everything in motion right. And I tried a lot of different things, and nothing was really working. And I reached out to Dave, who I'd worked with on 6 Feet Under very briefly. He was not the composer there. He was actually working as a music editor, because he had just moved to LA from New York. But I liked his work, and I liked his score, and I liked his personality, and I liked his brain. So I just said, can you look at this with me, and can we figure this thing out? And he said, I don't know where to draw from this, but I can maybe build something. And so he built something for that. So when I delivered that particular concept of how the show could work, I included that piece. And that became the first conversation of like, well, who did that? Like, they seemed to get it. And that was how they did the first meeting with Dave. And the meeting was gangbusters, and he's been on the show ever since. So I think in a weird way, it's like, to Steve's point, a lot of times it's a little thing. It's like somebody just help somebody out. Like, we're all problem solvers. And when I have a problem and I don't know how to fix it, and someone says, hey, you know what? I got a few friends and they're coming over on Saturday, and I bet we could build something and send it over to you on Sunday. Man, that's like, you just gave me a wonderful option, even if it doesn't work. Like, just the fact that you threw it forward just says thank you. Like, I will find another opportunity for us to work together, because I know when I need the help, you were there. And I think, we're very much an ecosystem, and we really try hard to make sure that everyone respects everybody appreciates it, and that, their time is respected. And sometimes you have to do things with no real aim or goal under the hopes of helping somebody out, and that can lead to wonderful things.
Absolutely. We have a lot of questions about unrepresented composers. Do you feel agents are necessary in order to reach out, or do you feel unsolicited pitches or anything on that line? Do you feel that is an acceptable way, or how to approach you. I know when I say you specifically, Colleen and Thomas, actually Steve too, because there was questions about you know, how to befriend showrunners and get in their network. So you kind of skip the line, so to speak. How would you, what piece of advice would you recommend to give people to do that? And you can also say it vaguely in the sense of not necessarily me, but in order to find more creatives, I suggest film festivals. If you want to influence more music supervisors, try the music supervisor assistants or whatever. So let's start with Steve. How would somebody try to connect with other showrunners and people that are working on your level?
I mean, like, showrunners are all very different animals. I think I'm the petting zoo version of most showrunners. So the easiest way to do that is just to walk up to me at a bar and be like, "Hey, I wrote some music." But I don't tend to. I mean, that of course you want to build relationships with people, but I make decisions about the show based on what's good for the show, not based on who I know. So that's, you know, and I think it's really more of a question for Colleen and Thomas, specifically because they are like the layers that people have to go through to even get to me, to be on a list for me to look at. So that's about all I can contribute at this time, unless I see your music in something else,
Right.
and I seek you out. I sort of think that's tricky to get straight to a showrunner.
Well, I just want to echo what you just said, because there is a big myth that you can skip the line, so to speak, and that if somebody really just networks all the way up to the top, that they can get in. But I think you prove a point that there are layers of people involved, and just because you do all this work and you think that there's a you know, a shorthand ticket to the top, that there actually is many different circles that you need to influence at the same time. As Thomas was saying, you gotta make everybody happy. It's not just one person. So yeah, Colleen or Thomas, do you have anything on that topic of unsolicited pitches, unrepresented composers? How do they kind of get into these scenarios of getting hired?
Well, you know, what Steve said, it really resonated with me. Like, it's not always, it's not about who you know. We know most of these composers, whether they have agents or not. It's about what's right for the show. So I think, like, I have hired people without representation. It's been few and far between. More often than not, they are represented by a reputable agent. But I'm not opposed ever to discovering new people. Then there are also people that have worked for years who no longer, you know, either want or feel they need an agent, you know? And so an agent isn't necessarily a prerequisite to being hired, but often it is the most direct way to the gatekeepers. And the reason for that is because of a level of trust and an existing relationship, and the ability that we hope. And by the way, not all agents are created equal. I will also say that. I mean, I feel like, you know, we talk about paying attention, listening to the brief, giving us what we need, giving the showrunner what they need. That's also a skill that the agent has to, you know, apply as well. And the really good ones are amazing at that. They will say, gosh, you know, I've just discovered this person. I don't really know. I've had agents introduce me to people that they haven't signed yet. And they've said, hey, take a look at this. What do you think? Take a listen. How do you feel about this person? And then, you know, again, I can't underestimate just doing the work. You know, sometimes we hear things and we're like, wow, that's really great. We should give this person a try. You know, experience goes a long way in getting the job, but doing the work and doing great work and consistent work and being there and showing up is a lot of it. And if you do that enough, you'll consistently make your way through.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think that, you know, agents are not all created equal, and some of them are wonderful to deal with and are great resources for us, and some of them are megalomaniacal pains in the asses who are just not fun to deal with and really make our job harder. And there's agents who go around me all the time. They'll go to Colleen and say, hey, Thomas doesn't like me, but I'm going to go to Colleen because she can find a way to navigate it in there. And I think, you know, I will look at whatever composer's there. I never want to punish a composer for their sort of inelegant agent or the agent that doesn't follow the brief or any of those things. I want to be really even-handed about all the music that I'm getting. But there is something about these little gatekeepers, myself included, that if I don't do my job well, good ideas die. You know, if Colleen is sort of going to go by a personality thing and not by what's right for the project, or Steve were to do that, good ideas die. So each of us are really tasked with being very open and being very curious and putting the extra work in to find that. The tricky part with people who are unsigned or don't have any representation is strictly one of experience. If I can check out the work and I can see that you've delivered on those things, and I even know a little bit about the personalities of the filmmakers that you're working with, I know a bit. And if I have a conversation with you and I can say, hey, how did that go? And you can say, look, I'm really glad it's done. I'll say that. And you're like, fair enough, you know, like tell me a little bit about that experience, because at least I now know what you've been through. And I kind of have a sense of what you might be able to handle. Because I know projects where I'm like, whatever composer's on this thing is going to probably hate me afterward for suggesting them for this, because it's going to be a tough road. But they could do something great, and it could be a turning point. And the hardest projects I've ever had have almost always led to the best projects I've ever had. It was always like the assistant editor who watched me go through hell with a fight between a producer and a director, and that basically said, hey, I think I saw how you handled yourself, and I think there's a project here that you might be interested in. It works the same way for us. So if we see somebody who's really risen to something and really did something innovative and interesting, that's super exciting, you know? And I think for us, if it's a small indie movie or a commercial, or if it's like a short film, all of that is really viable. But I think it has to be tied to the work. When people just say, hey, I'm a composer, I've got no credits whatsoever, here's some music, that might be helpful for me to use for temp music, but I don't know how you're going to work in that environment. And to Colleen's point, there is a unique difficulty to doing these projects, and Steve has just been through hell getting his done, and it meant that everybody on board had to be doing more than they were expected to make that work. And if you don't know that someone can handle it, it's really hard to bring them in the room and say, hey, I'll stand by them, because you know that if you broke it, you buy it, you got to find a way to fix it. And when the job is this hard already, you don't want to bring somebody in and say, I really set you up for failure, and I'm sorry, you just weren't ready. You know, I don't want to make that mistake. But I also want to hire somebody brand new and give them the opportunity to do the best work of their career, because they're hungry, they're excited, they know this is an opportunity to do something magical.
I think you broke it, you buy it is how I'm now going to refer to choosing a composer.
Yeah, it kind of feels that way.
One kind of quick final question before we will let you guys go, and thank you so much for your time so far, is you bring up a lot of points about you need to prove that you can handle the situation. You can prove that you can handle the schedule and whatever. And so if you don't have a credit that proves it, but you were an assistant to somebody, or you have a bunch of, say, film credits, but you want to work on TV schedules, what are the things, what are the key factors that you're looking for to say, okay, this person, they can handle this pressure, they can handle this job? What is like just some key factors that you are really like, they need to hit these check marks in order to even me to consider them?
Well, I think I was going to say, I think it totally depends on what the needs of the show are, you know, like, okay. So that totally depends. But I would say an acute understanding of schedule, an acute understanding of notes, how to turn notes around, how to communicate with your showrunner, also how to deal with the studio or the network or whomever is like, you know, sometimes at odds, sometimes not at odds, because that can be a delicate dance as well. Making sure that they're communicative and fast and thoughtful. But I would say a lot of it is just about the holistic understanding of how a project moves from production into post.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think so much of this really is being battle tested, you know, and I think that's why it's really great to work with another composer. Like if you're, for instance, working on small movies and you kind of want to work in television for the first time, it's not the worst idea to say, hey, I'm going to spend 6 months and try to assist a composer that's got too many television projects, can't keep up with it. And I'm not going to worry about credit. I'm not going to worry about all that stuff. I'm just going to learn how this works and see how that speed goes, because I have brought composers who worked in film into TV shows. And I got to say, it was a rough transition. Like, you know, I had a lot of late night calls of saying, listen, there's always another creative solution to this. Let's just talk it through and just know, no matter how mad you might be, there's another solution that will make everybody happy. We just got to figure out what that is. So it's a little bit like, everyone, the showrunners love to complain about network notes or studio notes. And again, a lot of those, there's a truth in those ideas, and there's a way of addressing that and finding a way to figure out what is it that is really being asked for. And I think that's the hard part. And when composers are defensive or get their egos into it, supervisors, if they're available, can help talk them through that. So you say, hey, you know what? This is an opportunity for you to do something even more magical. Let's find a way to do this together. And then you can deliver it. And they're going to feel great because tomorrow morning, they're going to have in their inbox a brand new cue, which found a way to do that.
I have something really important to say that you said that we didn't touch on. And this is a really, really good advice for composers. Your vision as a composer, or your job as a composer, is to execute the vision of the show. And to not be defensive when people give you notes, to not be like prickly, or, when somebody can't speak about music in a way that you maybe can, not to dismiss those notes for lack of communication, but try and extend and understand and deliver on your ultimate job, which is, like what the show needs. Did that make any sense? Do you guys understand what I'm trying to say? Like,
of course.
That's my second pet peeve, when composers want to be the artist of the show, or want to be, you're a part of a team.
And your solution is yours, your solution is yours. So even though it might not be the first idea, it's the same with actors. Like, actors will spend all night reading through a scene and having their perfect interpretation of it. And they go in and the director goes, no, can you give me another option? Like, you kind of have to be like, yeah, I think I could do another option. Let me find a way to do that. And that person gets hired over and over again, because that solution that they might not have thought was the right solution may be the right solution in context. Because we're all flying with a little bit of blinders, and we don't always see the big picture. And it's
literally, literally what you're describing happens at every level below whoever the CEO of the corporation that owns the network that the show is on deals with, right? Yeah. Like, that's the only person, and he's got shareholders to answer to. So there you go. Yeah. But like, those notes are coming downhill a long way before they get to us. So
totally.
Be positive.
And I want to end the panel with a final kernel of advice from everybody. So you can send off a lot of these kind of young, kind of starting out composers, a little piece of advice on what to do. I'm going to start out by, when you're replying to an email and you might be a little tony, make sure you share it with a friend to be like, how does this read to you? Because email can come across very aggressive sometimes and very defensive and whatnot. And you might not be trying to insinuate this. And so it's a very relationship-based business. So please run that email past somebody. Just make sure that it feels okay for them. Colleen, what's your little kernel of advice?
I think just what I was on before. Leave your ego at the door. You're there to do a job. Take notes. Be open. Be creative. Come from a yes and place, not a no place. That's my advice.
Thomas, what's your advice?
I would say continue to do things that you love. Like, keep yourself inspired and excited. And even if you don't have a project to put something in, build it. Like, if you love a movie and you just got it on Netflix, for example, and you're just going to sit, play, and try to do it yourself, build it and just put it out there on wherever it is. Just share and build things that you love, and people will find you because they'll find that love and that enthusiasm, and they'll find it to be infectious.
Steve?
I agree with everything you guys have said. And the last thing that I'll say, just coming from my perspective, is you don't have to agree with everything that I say, and I don't have to agree with everything that you choose, but you do have to be someone that I want to sit in a room with for several months and work on a project. So your attitude makes a big difference.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Perspective, for this awesome platform to bring all this messaging to you all. And yeah, Colleen, Thomas, Steve, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.